All right, Kim, go for it.
All right. Well, good morning, everybody. Happy Thursday. Hope your weeks have been going well and they're almost over. So that's nice, always. We've got a lot to pack in to our very short time together today, as we always do. So we're going to go ahead and jump right in. Um, so our agenda for the day, reviewing the agenda, we'll approve the meeting minutes from meeting 10 that you all were sent while I was out of town a couple weeks ago. And then we'll spend the first chunk of our meeting today doing our commercial code discussion and polling around section C40515, the renewable energy requirements. And then we'll shift to the second half of the meeting, focusing on section discussion and polling around section C406. Our C406 discussion today, we've split into two primary buckets. The first is focusing on the additional efficiency credits, and the second is focusing on the renewable and load management credits. And our kind of the boundary of our discussion today for section C406 is going to be the required mandatory points that folks have to earn to get minimum compliance with section C406. So we won't be diving into new credit options or changing any of the existing requirements within the options in C406. It's really going to be a focused discussion on how many points do we want to require for energy code compliance. If we have time, which might be ambitious of us to think we will do some final wrap up on section C402. You all were sent a survey ahead of this meeting, and appreciate those of you who took the time to share your input. There were just two final proposals we didn't get to at our last meeting that we asked you all about in the survey. And so if we have time, we'll kind of review those survey results and offer up any time for discussion if there is some. And then we'll wrap up at the top of the hour. So that's where we're headed. Any questions for the day? Not seeing any. We'll continue on. So our objectives for the day are for you all to give us to first have some time for discussion and then give us guidance on how you would like to make or not make modifications to section C40515 and section C406, again, focusing on that mandatory point, the mandatory points folks must earn for code compliance. If we have time, again, we'll get to section C402. Embedded into our presentation today, because C406 is quite a complicated section, we have prepared some informational slides for you guys to really show what the section C406 is requiring as is, and then the different compliance or different options there are to manipulate section C406 within the appendices in the code. So we'll be giving you guys a pretty detailed overview of section C406 before we jump into discussion. So throughout that presentation today, we really encourage you guys to ask clarifying questions when you have them, so that way we can make sure we save a lot of time for discussion. All righty. So with that, we'll move into the approval of meeting minutes. So would anybody like to make a motion to approve the meeting minutes from meeting 10?
Yeah, I'll move to approve the minutes for meeting 10.
I'll second.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Ron. All in favor of approving the meeting minutes for meeting 10, please say aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Thanks, guys.
Aye.
And anyone opposed? Oh, great. Sorry, trickling in ayes. Anyone opposed to approving the meeting minutes from meeting 10, please say nay. Okay, wonderful. Thanks, everyone. So the meeting 10 meeting minutes are approved, and we'll get those added to Colorado Energy Office website here soon. And so before we dive into our renewable energy discussion for the day, just a couple of quick things that I wanted to share with the board, and I'll just stop sharing for this so we can all see each other. And I think I just wanted to take a moment to share thoughts with you guys, because we are now in the middle of what is to be our intense discussion and polling time period from now pretty much until the end of the year. And so I just wanted to share with you all, as we're moving through the meetings from now until the end of December, all of the ideas that we are discussing and bringing forward are ideas that you all have shared with us or will be sharing with us through those initial surveys that we did. So the commercial survey you all have taken, you'll be getting a residential survey soon, and we'll wrap up with a model code survey, asking you guys where you might want to make modifications to the code. Those surveys are really, really, really important because we have such a limited time together. That's going to be where we can get most of your guys' input and then shape the meetings that we have to discuss the things that you guys might want to change. Polling is going to be happening throughout our meetings from now until the end of December. We're going to be doing straw polling because our team really needs to understand from the board's perspective how the direction that you guys want to take. Now, we understand that as we move through these meetings, people's opinions might change, board discussion might skew people in different directions, and that's okay. These first straw polls are the first chance that you guys get to give us direction, but it is not the only chance. We are going to have a lot of opportunities to iterate on these code changes. And so none of the discussions, none of the decisions that you all make in these early straw polls are final decisions. And so I really want to emphasize that these polls that we're going to do, and we're going to continue to do them today and through the end of December, are really for us to get that guidance that we need to make initial code change recommendations. And then you guys will have multiple opportunities to review that, consider them, and continue to make changes on them. So this is just the big ask. We're going to be discussing comments and proposals submitted in those surveys that you guys all have the commercial survey results from the board. So we asked you come prepared. We asked you've looked at the sections that we're going to talk about in each meeting and have some initial idea of how you guys might want to change those sections. And then we're also going to be polling in these meetings. So just again, another ask that you guys be ready with your ideas, knowing obviously that the discussion changes ideas and may shift the way you want it to vote, but having some semblance of an idea of how you want to manipulate these sections. It's going to be really, really, really important. And I know that's a little bit of extra work on your guys' plate, but I'd rather say that now at the beginning of the process than feel like we didn't have, that we didn't have enough time to get through everything, or that you guys didn't feel like you were prepared through these next few months, because it's going to be a little intense. So that is all I wanted to say. Any questions from you guys or comments before we jump into the meat of the meeting today? Okay, not seeing any. Thank you all for listening to my baby lecture. And now I will turn it away, or turn it over to Adam. So before we dive into the renewable energy discussion, there are a few PV considerations that we just wanted to lay the land, put all of these considerations out there. These are things that CEO has been thinking of since the start of this work. And then also we got some helpful input from PNNL around the renewable energy sections in this code. And so we'll be sharing those as well. So Adam, I will pass it over to you.
Great, thanks, Kim. Go ahead and move on. So just kind of to reiterate, this is really a lot of information that we have collected both internally at CEO, that we've heard from all of you, that we've heard from external stakeholders, and that we've heard from PNL. So this is kind of trying to compile all of those different main points really into some summary information for you all to be considering as we are discussing the mandatory prescriptive renewable requirements in the code. So I think the first point is something that we all are acutely aware of, is that on-site renewable energy requirements do have a high first cost. Regardless of cost effectiveness, they are costly to install upfront. And then looking at the cost effectiveness over time, in some discussions with PNNL, they shared some analysis that they have done on the cost effectiveness of those provisions in particular, and specifically on the amount of on-site renewable energy required in the code. So for those of you who haven't dug into the exact wording of the language, there is a 0.75 watts per square foot of conditioned floor area of the 3 largest floors of the building. That is the requirement, the prescriptive requirement for the renewable energy in C405.15. And so a few things on that. That number, according to PNNL, was set because there is an expectation that approximately 98 to 100%. So basically all of that electricity would be able to be consumed on the building site. And so it kind of takes net metering largely out of the equation and out of consideration. And that is why they set it at the 0.75 watt per square foot for those three largest floors. And they were very clear that, you know, if they feel that that is kind of the ceiling for their expectation that all of that energy can be used on site. So that is just something that they shared with us that they would like for us to share with you all. Obviously, I think we are all aware that generally speaking, the cost of actual electricity generation from those renewable systems on site is lower than purchasing utility electricity. And their analysis shows that the savings from that on-site generation and the on-site consumption of that electricity generation does exceed over the life of the renewable system the first cost of the system. Carolyn, I'm assuming you have a question about this, so I'm going to go to you quickly before I keep
Yeah,
going.
I was just wondering if you could clarify, Adam, on their calculation and their conclusion that 98 to 100% of electricity is able to be consumed on site. Did they share with you what their assumptions were around the building type and use and floor number of floors?
They did not. They said that they might be able to share more in-depth information, but they had to get approval to do so, and we're not able to do so in time for this meeting. So I'm mostly just sharing the conclusions at this point, and I think we might be able to get more information in detail about this if you'd like it. But this was the overall conclusion.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to see if you had that information. So your answer's fine. Thank you.
Unfortunately, do not. Elizabeth?
Yeah, similar question to Carolyn's. I'm curious why they or how the math worked out that having like on-site energy storage and inverters and all that was less expensive than just connecting things to the grid. I would like to see those numbers because there's a whole bunch of extra equipment that's required to do that. Right. That I don't know about you guys, but I never see that happening. It doesn't. Right. It's not part of the requirements.
Yeah, and I will be perfectly honest that, you know, there were a lot of those questions that I asked of them as well, and frankly, it was just you know, needed to get kind of what I was saying to Carolyn, needed to get approval to be able to share specific data, and I don't think that was able to be achieved before this meeting.
Okay, yeah. I'm cynical. I'm not buying
it. yeah, and I had some similar thoughts.
Thanks.
So yeah, Tim, go ahead.
Yeah, short question on getting feedback, if you can, maybe you can't, on what they estimated was the lifespan of a system, because I'm sure it would have to be some average based on different current manufacturers' things.
Yeah, and I think so. We did talk about that, and my recollection was that it was either 25 or 30 years, which I think was what some people would argue is a longer lifespan than is realistic, depending on the need for replacing certain components and other things. But I believe it was somewhere in that 25 to 30 year range. Okay, so that's what PNNL shared. And if I can get any more detailed information on that, I told them I would be sharing at least this high level approach. And that if they can provide us any additional information, we would like to see it. But just wanted to share that with you all. The next point really, I think, is something we're all aware of being a challenge in the code right now as the language is written, is that selling RECs for building projects is a good way to help cost effectiveness. And the code obviously now, as it is written, requires the retention of RECs for at least 15 years. So just wanted to make that point. Next slide. You know, there are additional benefits besides just the electricity generation itself that have been identified, and noting that that is in many cases combined with that next bullet as well of resilience opportunities and peak load generation oftentimes benefits more greatly when you have that on-site electric energy storage system as well. And I don't believe, well, in fact, I'm quite confident, kind of to your point, Elizabeth, that the cost of electric storage on site was not factored into that cost effectiveness determination. Yeah, I'm not 100% certain on that, so please do not quote me on that, but that was my understanding, is that that was not included.
It's
then
just
we've all,
magic. We're just
yeah.
going with magic in the code now, you guys.
Yeah. So those points, I think, kind of go hand in hand, is that a lot of the resilience and peak load benefits come with that on-site electric storage as well. And I made clear to make that point to PNNL, and they agreed, but I'm not sure it was factored into the actual analysis. Next point, I think we've talked about quite a bit, the challenges with the offsite procurement for buildings that cannot use the on-site or cannot meet the on-site renewable requirements. Offsite procurement can be extremely challenging. A couple of points that we've talked about in this group already is, limited availability of offsite generation. It's not being built fast enough for projects that already want to take advantage of it, let alone if you start having a mandatory requirement for projects to use it, or to contract for it. And then building departments, as we've also talked about, are not renewable procurement experts. They're not renewable power purchase agreement or contract experts. And so there is an enforceability challenge with that as well. And then the final point is that there have been many challenges raised over the last few years about distribution system capacity and challenges with interconnection timelines and costs for on-site renewable energy systems. So just wanted to kind of provide all of that feedback to everybody, kind of summarize all the things we've discussed and heard and talked about into a couple of slides, so that really helps to inform what we will talk about next, which is what do we want to do with these requirements. Tim?
Yeah, just for clarity, thanks, Adam. With the IECC language, or how it's broken up, is that will, in the 24, it'll continue to be that the residential portion will still apply to 3-story or less multifamily. And with that being said, then the new requirement that we're starting to discuss, or that's in the 24 for the on-site renewable, would only be applying on the commercial portion, which would be 4-story or taller apartments, and then of course all other.
Right.
So that's still correct.
That's right. Yeah. So the only residential implications here are those multifamily 4 stories or larger, and then all commercial. Yeah.
Thank you.
And then there is the optional appendix on the residential side, but it is not in the main code like it is on the commercial side. Okay. Well, I'm going to turn it back over to Kim now to kind of guide us through the discussion and some of the feedback that we got from all of you in the survey.
Awesome. Thanks, Adam. All right, so first we're gonna start by sharing the board's perspectives that were provided through the commercial survey and the recommendations / proposals and comments that folks had for changes and discussion points. I just wanted to note that we didn't have any comments around strengthening this section, only neutral comments, questions, and weakening proposals and thoughts from the board. So we tried to categorize these as best we could, and you guys helped us with some of this categorization as you filled out the survey. But I also just want to flag, if you guys want to follow along with the code requirements, if you're not familiar with them, you can find these on page 415 of the PDF draft code that you all have, and so feel free to pull those up. For this section of the code, we had 2 neutral comments, which were that board members noted that they wanted to discuss the cost and operational complexities of requiring PV on all buildings. So that's something we can save for our discussion time, and that there will be challenges with space and cost for renewable energy systems in commercial areas. We had 3 comments from the board that were more neutral, but leaned in our sort of categorization towards weakening comments. And those were, the first, there are concerns from board members on the achievability of for certain building types and complexities excuse me, let me read that again. Board members on the achievability for certain building types and the complexities of offsite options. We had a board member advocating for a more flexible approach to mandatory PV. And then finally, a board member noting that there are variations in contract duration for REC purchasing and other REC complexities, again, adding to that offsite procurement complexity issue. And then lastly, we had several comments that were categorized as weakening comments in the survey. So just a quick summary of these. Board member would like to advocate for removing this section as mandatory from the code. Again, there were concerns about feasibility for specific building types and complexity of REC options for offsite procurement. inequities and practical challenges in enforcing these mandates, notes that there are different considerations between energy codes and practical interconnection feasibility of these systems on the grid. And finally, suggestions that we limit solar mandates to just solar readiness due to the diminishing greenhouse gas returns and differences in the net metering rules across the state. So I think Adam and I, in looking at these comments, generally felt like the board was aligned as far as questioning sort of the feasibility and the overcomplicatedness of the offsite procurement options and wondering whether or not we want to keep this in as a mandatory section. So we want to move really into the discussion. I think folks are pretty well aware of what this requirement is. Again, we didn't have really separate different opinions from the board as we looked at the survey results. So with these board comments in mind, we want to open up the floor for discussion. The first and most pivotal question we want to answer as a board is, what do we want to do with this section of the code? From the survey responses, we distilled the following options for the board to consider and to kick off the discussion, but we recognize that not every one of you were able to take the survey. And so if there's other options you guys want to discuss, please bring those up. So we think there are a few options that you guys can consider here. The first is just keep the section in. Don't do anything with it. The second is keep the section with some modifications, perhaps to the offsite procurement or building type requirements. 3 is to remove this as a mandatory section and move it as an optional credit piece you can earn credit for in section C406. That could be with or without modification. The 4th option is to move this into an optional appendix with or without modification. And number 5 is just to take it out, just strike it entirely. And then there's always, of course, an open-ended option of what else could we do with it. So with that, we have about 10 minutes to discuss this first question. And then depending on where we land with this first question, if we decide we want to keep it, we have a second question following around what we might want to do with the offsite procurement pieces. So I will stop talking. And if board members want to raise their hand when they've got thoughts to share, please do so. And I'll start with Carolyn.
Yeah, thanks, Kim. First I just want to say, I'm a big advocate for solar and customer-sided solar overall. And, I come from Boulder, where we just adopted code with, requirements for solar adoption. But in my opinion, for a statewide minimum code, we need to be very thoughtful about the statewide context. And for that reason, I advocate that we remove the section in its entirety from the base code. I am open to it as an optional appendix. I think there's elements of it that make sense in the credits. I'll talk a little bit about what I think some of the issues are if we keep it in either the appendix and or credits portion, but I feel fairly strongly we need to remove it from the base code. There's different interconnection contexts across the state, whether you're a municipal utility, a co-op, or an investor-owned utility space. So not everybody has an equal playing field in terms of what is required of them, how much they can interconnect, and what the benefits or costs are to them. I think the PNNL analysis is flawed in a lot of its assumptions, as I think we alluded to in our questions. So certainly have concern about presuming the systems will pay back. The net metering context in Colorado is going to change. And when this base code when this minimum code goes into effect and jurisdictions are required to adopt it, we're going to be at a statewide grid that's largely renewable, 80% or more renewables. And so what happens, at least under currently net metering context, is customer-sided renewables gets preferential treatment and they curtail utility assets when there's overgeneration. Right, so we're going to be driving up the cost of electricity by continuing to build and require that. So again, I think it makes sense for specific jurisdictions, and I think we should provide them tools that allow them to consider it, but I don't think we should require it in the base code. Then on the other considerations, and we spoke to this, I think, in previous meetings, I think it's important to remember that code officials in approving permits and approving buildings and inspecting them are inspecting them at the time of construction. When you start to incorporate things like rec contracts, offsite solar contracts, etc., like that doesn't really sit within the jurisdictional construct of enforcement. Once day one passes, like it's very difficult to truly bind and to tie it to the property. There's been some creative things that I know Ron, for example, has done that we adopted in terms of, trying to tie it to property records, but it's challenging. And so I think we need to consider, like, if we're going to require things, particularly that make it harder for the economics to work out for property owners that aren't enforceable from a jurisdiction's perspective, then I think we're upside down in our requirements. So I will pass the torch, but that's where I stand, and certainly what I'm going to be strongly advocating for.
Thank you, Carolyn. A lot of really great points. And just to note, Tim, I agree with Carolyn. Put it into the appendix as it is was a recommendation from Tim, and I got a +1 from Tom in the chat. Tim, would you like to elaborate? And then we'll go to Kristen.
Yeah, real quick. Actually, Carolyn made a great point. Hadn't really thought about from an enforceability standpoint. It's hard enough with what we do, kind of working through just the body of the code and the plans and everything, but trying to now have staff deal with the other part of that, with the recs and everything. So I think that's just another one why I would like to keep that into or move it into an appendix. And then if the jurisdiction has a staff and chooses to go forward based on, say, their council or whatever, then they can take care of that or hire staff or whatever that is. But being a statewide code, I don't think you're going to see a lot of that with the smaller jurisdictions thing.
Thank you, Tim. Yeah, Kristen.
I'd like to invite our solar expert to elaborate a bit more on her perspective on moving into optional credits under C406.
Yeah, I mean, I could take this one on, and I also saw Jesse had a comment to better explain curtailment. So maybe I'll start with that one, and then we can talk about the optional credits. So on really sunny days, where maybe it's not hot, like certainly in shoulder seasons, the utilities are already curtailing renewables. It just comes with the realities of renewables. What you generate doesn't always align with your load. As you get more and more on the grid, we're going to be doing more and more curtailment. And what is happening now already is in areas where you have high customer sided solar generation, solar gardens, things that cannot also be curtailed. The utility has to curtail its generation. So that means that, they're paying for power that they can't use on the grid, and it's impacting utility costs. So that's the concern. I think, the state will change net metering rules to balance that a little bit more, which then diminishes the value proposition for customers.
I think we need to be really careful, Carolyn, about saying what the state is and is not going to do. The law as it stands right now let's not speculate.
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously a task force exploring revisions to net metering rules. I know it's not imminent, but I think we're certainly likely to see changes. And then I want to just also state, and there's a variety of utility constructs in the state that are going to be separate from that, whether it's a municipal utility or co-op that's not under the regulated construct. So that was my comment about
under the regulated construct right now. I mean, as a member of a co-op, I really want to be careful in trying to say that there are certain rules that aren't. Right now, we have a uniform law in Colorado that does apply. But with C406, do you think they could, if this were to remain an optional appendix, that it would make sense to allow people to earn credit if they do choose to do this under 406?
Yes. So I am not advocating to remove it from the optional credits as something that that can be claimed, with the caveat that I would advocate to not require all the rec retainage requirements that are currently under the base code or kind of written in terms of contract length, et cetera, allowing of offsite. I think I would only advocate to allow for on-site renewables to count towards optional credits.
I agree. Thanks.
Thank you both, and thanks for that additional explanation, Carolyn. Adam, did you want to jump in? Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I just had a question, maybe Carolyn, I don't know if this is for you, or I think you're probably best positioned to answer this, but understanding that C406 already has those requirements. And so if the question is like, if we're taking out the mandatory prescriptive requirement, does that mean you change what's in 406 already? Because it's like, there was the mandatory minimum prescriptive requirement, and then there was also the option for like essentially additional renewable to help meet the and renewable and load management credits. And so like, are you advocating that the load management credits would just stay the same in terms of renewables, or that there would be some modification, or that you would be interested in seeing some modification to provide like higher credit for renewables under those credits if this gets removed from the base code?
Yeah, I think they have to be modified from where they stand, because their presumption and their point allocation is based on an assumption that there's a minimum amount of solar that's required under the base code, and then what is getting credit is increments above that. So I think we would have to, assess whether the point system is appropriate, and then also we need to correct for above what is required to just really align with what they're doing to meet their base performance requirements. So if they're going through a performance pathway and crediting solar towards meeting their minimum performance requirement, it would be incremental, but it's not incremental over section 405. So we'd have to do some tweaking to make sure we had internal consistency across the code by removing that section.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Thanks, Carolyn.
thanks.
Okay. Any other board members that want to share their thoughts on this section?
I don't necessarily want to share thoughts, but I also just want to put out the idea or the context of including storage as part of the consideration. Not necessarily advocating for or against, but I think it's just something that's been brought up a couple of times in discussions, in the information we shared. It's been brought up in the chat again already about, the opportunities that energy storage can provide to support the benefits of solar, and recognizing Tim's comment as well as what we acknowledged in the previous was just that, yeah, that does add first cost as well. And so I just wanted to see if anyone had thoughts about any implications for energy storage, or whether or not that changes anybody's perspective, if some of those considerations were to be brought into the discussion.
I'll offer. I think where it would be nice if we can figure out a way within point, optional credits to encourage integration with storage, because of the benefits overall for resiliency, better utilization of distributed renewable generation, grid service opportunities. So, I think the only thing I would offer is we probably need a little assistance from our experts to understand how we allocate credits under the equivalency requirements, on how those points are supposed to be equitable in terms of energy benefit. And so we just probably need to think about that construct, but I'd certainly support inclusion of storage in some way.
And to be clear, you're only talking about that in the context of the credits. You're not talking. You're basically saying that additions of storage would not assuage any of your concerns about the mandatory prescriptive. Okay, just to clarify.
Thanks, Karen. Elizabeth.
Yeah, similar thoughts. I think it's a separate consideration. Like in our projects, for every 100 projects that consider solar, maybe 1 or 2 consider battery storage. And even then, when it's investigated, and the design considerations around battery storage are layered into some of the other challenges, cost and space are are definite considerations. And of those one or two projects that have considered it, I have had 0 actually implement it. So there are still a lot of barriers. But I really like the idea of having it as an option, because that is what encourages people to look into it. You know, you ask your electrical engineer to say, okay, well, what would it take to do battery storage? They can do that investigation. They can think about it. That's how things start to work their way into the code, is sort of sneak them in through C406 until it becomes a gimme. You know, when that option in C406 is considered an easy one, you know, then you know it's time to start to work it in. So I really like having it as an option. Even if nobody uses it, people will start to look at it.
And just wanted to note really quickly here before we get to Anna, I don't know if you're going to say this, Anna, but energy storage is one of the credit options under the renewable and load management credits already. So I don't think that the board would necessarily have to do anything to add that. It's already there, unless there was some decision about how to manipulate the renewable energy credit options, or to try to, as Carolyn suggested, maybe like somehow connect those, like do like a renewables plus storage credit or something like that, rather than having them be only separate. I don't know what the thinking was there, but just wanted to flag that it is also in there right now.
Yeah, I would. Oh, go ahead, Elizabeth.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, I want to clarify. I would prefer it in the standard C406 table, not in that other table. Like, I don't even like that other table. I think that's really confusing for a lot of reasons. I specifically would prefer to have it in a C406. You know, I know there are 2 different tables. Sorry, I forget the names of the tables, but you know, the one we're all used to. I would rather have
efficiency credit table.
Yeah, that one. Yeah. I would rather have it in that table, just because I have other thoughts about the load management table.
Okay. Yeah, and to be clear, I think that's part of the conversation that will happen in our next meeting, and more about, like, we're talking more about requirements today, and then like about where to move credits, what credits to have, all that kind of stuff next time. So hold that thought, and we will discuss that next time. Anna, did you want to weigh in on something?
Yeah, I did. I just wanted to note that as you guys are talking about energy storage, particularly electric energy storage, I would encourage you to include thermal energy storage in your considerations, because we all know that batteries require a lot of fans and ventilation and exhaust. And if we want to be considerate of the extra energy required for electric energy storage, thermal energy storage, in my experience, has been a more efficient way to store electricity, depending on your building type.
Thanks, Anna. Rob, what are you?
Yeah, I just want to make maybe a quick pitch to move this to the appendix instead of the option, or instead of moving it to the optional credits, keep the optional credits where they are. On-site generation and storage are not conserving energy. They're not pulling energy out of the system. They're just changing how it's dumped into the system. And so I want to make sure that we're putting efficiency first and not putting generation, and not affording the opportunity to build a worse building that doesn't pull energy out of the system in lieu of just changing how we dump energy into the system.
Thanks, Rob. Yeah, Adam, jump in.
I was just going to echo, what Rob said, and I think I've heard several other board members say this as well, as that renewables and storage should not be a substitute. I think our perspective is that it should not be a substitute for energy efficiency. We should be, I think we are certainly fine with having it be additive, whether it's through an appendix or through the credits options, but we certainly should not have it as a substitute for energy efficiency.
Thanks, Adam. Okay, so we're creeping up towards the end of our session to talk about the renewable energy requirements today. So I think I want to do a little temperature check with folks. Again, I think that there's sort of, I have not heard a board member yet advocate that let's keep C406 in place as is. And so
just to declare 405.
I'm sorry.
405. 405.15. Yeah.
Yeah.
Too many numbers.
Too many numbers. All the numbers. Thank you for fixing it. 405.15 is what I meant to say. And so I've kind of heard 2 different options. And again, focusing on this first primary question, there are a couple of other sub considerations to this that would we could discuss later. So the first option that I'm sort of hearing is move the renewable energy requirements into C406, or adapt the current renewable energy requirements in C406 to better fit removing this section from the code. The second option that I heard is to move this section out entirely into an optional appendix. Again, potentially with some modifications around the rec requirements. Is there an option that was stated that doesn't kind of fall into those two primary buckets that I missed? Adam, do you have your hand up?
Maybe I would just offer that I think maybe we could start with a high level poll of keep, move, or remove. And then once we kind of determine where the board is leaning on those three main levels, then we can start, like if the determination is move it, then we can have a vote on, well, do we want to make it optional credits or make it into an appendix?
Okay.
Just something like that so that we get kind of into those subcategories in a second vote, perhaps.
That's fine. Okay, so we can do our first straw poll to what Adam just suggested. So the first option, option one, will be to keep the section in place. And I'm going to stop sharing so we can not get confused by the options I have on my slide. So option one will be keep the section in place. Option two will be to move the section somewhere, whether that be an appendix or a different section of the code. And then the third option will be to take it out altogether. Yeah, Andrew.
In these options,
Yeah.
could the option to include in the table in the body is a credit and the option to have is an appendix coexist?
I think those could coexist, yes. So let's think if we want to take it out of the where it is currently in its base code and put it into C406 or an appendix or both. Let's capture that in a I just want to move it somewhere. So that would be option two. So option one, keep it. Option two, move it. Or option three, remove it entirely. Do those options seem clear to everybody for this initial poll? Okay. So if you would like to keep this section in, oh, yeah, Elizabeth.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to add, if folks like the idea of moving it, it is in the 2021 IECC C406 right now. So there's a lot of familiarity for people currently.
Awesome. Thanks for that context. Okay, so if you would like to keep the section C40515 where it is in the code, please raise your hand now. Okay, I see 0 hands raised for that option. If you would like to move this section out of where it lives in the base code and into one of the appendices or updating C406 or both, you guys are already so fast, please raise your hand now. Okay, I see 13 hands raised, and I'm just keep your hands up really quick. Okay. Oh wait, so thank you everyone. So 13 hands voted to move. And then if you would like to take this section out entirely and not move it anywhere else, please raise your hand now. Okay, I see no hands. Andrew, I just want to check. I think you're the only board member I didn't see a hand raised for. Did you have a vote one way?
No, I'm sorry. I would vote to not have it there.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so one vote to remove it entirely.
And I wouldn't say entirely. I apologize.
That's okay.
I'm more in the other camp to either an appendix or the credit or both.
Okay. Okay, great. So I think that's then full board consensus that we want to move it somewhere. So we'll do one more straw poll, and then Adam, I think we're going to move us on to section C406, if that makes sense to you. So the next thing I think we would love some guidance on is, do we want to move it to C406 only? So not have it as an optional appendix, but put it in C406 and do something with it there. Do we want to, that's option one. Option two would be to move it into an optional appendix and keep C406, not touch what's currently in C406. Or the third option being do both, like update C406 and have it as an optional appendix. Because I think that's kind of what I'm hearing, Andrew, was your last idea. And Adam, jump in if I'm misinterpreting.
No, those I think represent the perspectives that were shared. I think that the only thing I want to understand with the C406 moving into C406 is recognizing that it would somehow move it to C406 and somehow figure out how that relates, how that works with the requirements that are already in C406 for renewables. Because I think that since there are already renewable requirements, there's already energy storage requirements in that renewable and load management table. That would be a figuring out. So I think we could do this vote about like where people want to put it, and then we could maybe have a little bit of discussion about like what does that look like.
Okay. So again, trying to make sure that we're very clear on what we're going to be voting for. So if you would like to move this into C406 and update C406 accordingly, knowing that it's now out of the base code, that would be option 1. Option 2 is to move this section as to an optional appendix that jurisdictions could adopt. And the third option would be to do some combination of both of those things. So have it as an optional appendix, but also revisit the renewable energy requirements in C406. Okay. So if you would like to do option 1, and if you're kind of in between option 1, 2, like if 3 is like a maybe, just like, I'd say if you're not sure, default to 3, because that's like the open-ended bucket of like, we want to put it somewhere and we just still need to figure out where it goes. So if you just want to move it to C06, not have it as an optional appendix, please raise your hand. Okay. Thanks, everyone. So I see 6 hands raised. You guys can lower your hands. If you want to move this section of the code into an optional appendix, please raise your hand now. Okay, I see 3 hands raised. Thank you, guys. And if you're kind of somewhere in the middle, you want to make some adjustments to C406, but you also want it as an optional appendix, please raise your hand now. All right, so we are all over the board. So I see 5 hands raised for that. Adam, I think in the interest, thank you guys, you lower your hands. I think in the interest of time, Adam, I want to keep us moving through to C406 discussion, and knowing that some of this context from our discussion now can kind of feed into what we're thinking about for our mandatory points. Does that seem okay, Adam?
I think so. I think maybe if we could just spend like maybe 5 minutes just seeing if anyone who can advocate, because I think from my perspective, and we might have some questions about like, is there any downside to having it, modifying C406 in whatever way we choose, and then also having an appendix, because it seems like that's where the majority of the camp is either it's both or it's just in C406. So I just wanted to see if there's like any thoughts about the downside of having both.
Thanks,
just to see if we can get over that hump.
Okay, I'll ask for board members that speak quickly, so we can continue on. And Rob, I'll go to you first.
Yeah, quick. Just trying to make this quick. I'll make this quick. What's the difference between what's in C406 right now versus the C405 at 15 expectations?
Can speak to it briefly because I have it pulled up right in front of me. So it's looking more at, my understanding is a smaller requirement. So it's 0.1 watts per square foot rather than the 0.75 watts per square foot. And then the credits are essentially calculated based on how much renewable, like the minimum I think is the 0.1. And then if like you do more, you get additional potential credits. Anna, I don't know if you have any.
Yes. So the number of credits that you can receive, and sorry, Rob, if I didn't hear your question, you broke up a little bit, but I think you're asking what is currently in the 2021 IECC for renewable energy.
It's what's in the table, like what's in the 24 tables. What's the difference between the C406 credits for renewables as written and
okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's
where
I was trying to differentiate between the like 0.75 watts versus the 0.1 and
Got it. Okay, so under the renewable energy R01 credit, you can receive credits based off of the amount of renewables that you provide above what is already required in section C405.15. That capacity has to be at least 0.1 watts per square foot of building area, not of the 3 largest floors, in order to receive any credits under R01. So it's covering a larger area of the building, and so more PV. Does that make sense? Carolyn, did you have a follow-up to that?
No, I have a different comment.
Okay. Did that answer your question, Rob?
To the best of your ability, yes, I think it did.
If you have a more in-depth question, we can talk about it offline too.
Yeah, and Rob, if you want to kind of detail your question in the chat, we'll capture that and we can send email follow-up for sure. Carolyn.
Yeah, I think just one thing I want to name and then explain my vote and my comment is, I think it's important for us to understand that if we put it in an optional appendix, we're providing communities with what we've endorsed as an appendix that they could adopt. And so I want to be clear that I don't endorse taking 405.15 as it currently exists and moving in its entirety to an optional appendix that we would advance forward. So if we're on that trajectory, I would switch to the first vote, which is just to retain something in 406. So just want to be clear about that if we were to provide an optional appendix, we would need to make changes to what's in 405.15.
Okay. Thanks, Carolyn. I appreciate that clarification. And I think I was reading between the lines in assuming that, but I appreciate you naming that assumption. Okay. So I guess to Adam's question, I'll give it one more moment in case any other board members have any final thoughts on this. Is there an issue from board members, or do any folks see a downside to keeping solar as an optional credit thing you can earn credits for in C406, as well as something that is an optional appendix that communities could adopt in full? Appreciate that, Elizabeth, that extra context too.
So just to clarify, Elizabeth, with that comment, are you saying that you would support it being an optional appendix if it was modified to get rid of some of the problem issues that we've identified?
Yeah, and then my thinking there was, well, if we're going to change it, why not just have it in C46 and have it be credits rather than doubling up on our work?
Fair.
Okay. All right.
Agree with that.
Okay, so thank you guys. I think so. I'm just going to review the vote and just kind of just to make sure we all understand kind of where our heads are at. So 6 folks voted to move this section into C406 with some modifications. 3 voted to move it into an optional appendix, and 5 of you voted to do some sort of both option. So it seems like generally the board wants to keep it as an option for projects or jurisdictions, not a mandatory requirement. And whether that lands itself in C406 or as an optional appendix, it seems like generally, if I'm pulling a majority, I would say most folks feel like it could land in C406 as an option first, and then we could see if we want to continue to add it as an appendix after we make changes to C406. So I think that's what I'm picking up on, drawing away from this conversation. Please send any chats and thoughts that you have to wrap up our thinking on this, if you've got them, in the chat. But for now, I am going to continue us along so we have as much time as we can to get through section C406 today. And I will just remind our presenters that because there's so much information, please move quickly, and board members, please ask questions if you're not following along so we can save some time for discussion. Okie dokie, Adam, I believe I'm over to you.
Okay. So again, just wanted to provide some context on, there have been a lot of board questions about whether or not there are opportunities under the code, at the 2024 code as we know it, and what the reality of compliance with the code as it's written now is. Like, are all the pathways, are all the point values achievable for all the different occupancies and the different climate zones? What are the potential expectations that we would see in like most common approaches. And so we've talked, gotten some information from PNNL. Anna has done some analysis to look at both like are these achievable as they're written, and what are the most likely pathways we would see projects probably take, or what are the easiest pathways to get to compliance. So just wanted to share a few points from PNNL is that they did analysis that shows that all occupancies in all climate zones have pathways to achieve the point totals as they are with the available points. They both are able to essentially, I guess, have what we kind of call an EPCA safe approach, which is you can comply without being required to use any higher than federal minimum efficiency equipment. There are pathways for that. And then there are cost-effective pathways that PNNL has determined. And just noting that as it is currently written, the renewable and load management credits, there are opportunities for carryover. So essentially, if you get more renewable and load management credits than you need to meet compliance with the code, you can use some of those to essentially reduce the number of additional efficiency credits that you are required to achieve. And some of those are in place right now to make sure that if, in the few instances where there are really no viable pathways to achieve compliance with the additional efficiency credits without using that minimum efficiency or increasing efficiency of covered equipment, that you can essentially use some renewables or load management options to kind of offset that need. And that PNNL provided some context that if the board wants to increase the number of efficiency credits, there may be some need to, increase the number of efficiency credits that are required in order to achieve compliance, that the board may need to consider adding additional options for efficiency that are not equipment based or are not minimum efficiency equipment based. So we can talk a lot. I think that last point especially is going to be more depending on kind of what we want to do as a board in terms of what the requirements are. Then we can talk more about what options there are, and whether or not there are additional ways to achieve higher efficiency that are not currently credit options in the table. And then I think moving to the next one, Kim, I think Anna, I don't know if you wanted to weigh in on these comments here.
Yeah, so we took a look at office buildings, retail buildings, and multifamily buildings, both mixed fuel and all electric, and found that, and you'll see our analysis here in a little bit, but what we found was that for multifamily and retail buildings, the lift to comply with Section C406 is not, in our opinion, extreme. For office buildings, the pathway to compliance is much more difficult, and will require quite a few different types of credits because the credits assigned to each option are much lower unless you are providing a DOAS or doing a TSPR calculation. So the other item here is that the renewable and load management credits are difficult to achieve if you are in a location that does not have demand side management opportunities through your utility. Go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, thank you. In that analysis that you folks did, was there like a breakdown between shell buildings versus the finishes, or it was just the buildings?
Just total new construction. Yeah, I understand that is a concern. Sorry for interrupting, but go ahead.
Yeah, and that, because we get a lot, I mean, we haven't seen a new office building for a while, but I'm sure we will start seeing those sometimes, at least in Broomfield. I think there's stuff going up in other communities, but most of the time they come out as a shell building, and not my multifamily, but my retail is typically shell buildings. So I think that's be a big difference to look at somehow or another. Thanks.
Yeah, that's an important consideration. Thanks for pointing that out.
Yeah, Kristen?
And to confirm, this analysis did not include the proposals for modification from this board, correct?
Correct. These
That
are
is
all
correct.
based on the code as it is currently.
Yep, thanks.
Yep.
And we've got a lot of proposals in for adding credits and making it more
Yes.
flexible.
Yes.
Yes, we did.
That will be topic, as Adam said, for next meeting.
Yeah. So
We got-
keeping in mind that, yeah, we'll talk about the additional requirements today. If there is interest in increasing the requirements, then we will need to talk next meeting about both the proposals that have already been submitted for additional credit options, but also whether or not the board needs to contemplate adding any additional credits that we haven't already had proposed to try to help meet those additional requirements.
Awesome.
Okay.
All right.
Want to move on? We can go to the next one. So we're not really going to discuss this question yet, but this is what we really want the board to be keeping in mind as we are talking through the different ways to approach changing the additional efficiency credit requirements. And keep in mind, we're only talking about the additional efficiency credits here. We're not talking about the renewable and load management credits yet. Those will be a separate discussion, which once we get to that discussion, we may decide that, based on some comments we've received from, Carolyn and Elizabeth and maybe others about are there ways to incorporate those requirements into the broader table rather than having it as a separate table, but that can be discussed then. So just wanted to make sure everyone's focused here. So just wanted to share, I think most of you have probably seen this table in the code if you've been looking at it, but just wanted to share it here about these are the minimum requirement number of points that are required to be achieved for each of the building types in each of the climate zones in Colorado. So just wanted to kind of put this here as a baseline of this is what the code requires now, and you'll kind of see down a little bit in the next slide or in a future slide about how that will compare to like what's available and what we can do. Anna, did you want to share about this one really quickly? Sorry, Kim, we can go to the
Yes.
that one.
Yeah. So what we did was we used in section C407, the percent of annual energy cost savings that is required is directly linked to the number of points that are required for your occupancy and climate zone. So what we did was we calculated the percent annual energy cost savings required per occupancy and climate zone, and then you'll see how this table differs as we incorporate some of the optional appendices.
Thanks, Anna. Yeah, and I think the real point in showing you all this is just one, to help make the connection for everybody that what we do with C406 has implications for C407, and we will see the various implications. So this table is as the code is right now with the number of points that are required for each occupancy in each climate zone. Here's the percent reduction in energy cost if a project were to use C407 as their compliance pathway. As we discuss what some of the other appendices offer that have been recommended through board comments and public comments, we can also, there are similar analysis that Anna has done for those to show how that would implicate or how that would affect C407 if we were to pursue those pathways. Tim?
Yeah, thank you. I've got a question for Anna and the team. So these tables, the slides you have up are for the 20 out of the 2024 IECC, is that correct?
Correct. It was a calculation that's required in the 2024.
Right. And so was there some analysis on a side-by-side comparison between these tables and the 24 and how they compare to the 21?
The 2020, yeah, it is more stringent. The 2021 IECC requires 20% annual energy cost savings.
Across the board.
Okay.
It's not tied to C406.
Across the board. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Because I think it'd be important, at least in my mind, to look at that difference being more stringent and then helping maybe set the stage for if people on the board are you going to want to take that even a step higher, so to speak, so that this is already going to be an impact, just the base 2024. And then if we start increasing on top of that, what does that look like economically and enforceability? That's my comment.
Thanks, Tim. Elizabeth?
Yeah, this will probably be a conversation for another day, but just to build on what Anna just said, how, you know, the savings are intended to be tied and linked and connected to the targets we have to hit for C407. The challenge there is that a lot of things that you can get credit for in C406, you cannot get credit for in C407. So if you have a project in, like, you know, a group R or, you know, group I that has maybe high process loads where you can't, you know, claim any savings under C407, hitting, you know, 27% energy cost savings when you've got 2/3 of your building is process loads is not feasible. So there are things that you get credit for in C406, like reduced air infiltration and you know, high efficiency appliances and things like that that maybe have water use reduction that you can't claim savings for in C407. There's already a misalignment between those things. And these numbers, again, like these percentages that we're seeing for C407 were also just arbitrarily changed without allowing or without creating the alignment between C406 and C407. So that's probably a conversation when we get to C407, but we've got issues over there too. So C407 is not perfect.
Yeah, and to be clear, this is just demonstrating if we didn't touch C407 at all and we manipulated C406, here would be the implications for C407, right? So I think that that's really what that doesn't mean that the board is not going to touch C407 at all or potentially fix some of those challenges. And so to your point, I think that will come up in the conversation when we talk about C407.
So yeah, anyway, I'll just warn you, as we look at some of these C406 credits, I'm going to be saying, you know, why can't we get credit for this in C407 as well? Let's make things align.
Yeah. And I would certainly encourage you to, you know, make the case for, like, well, it, you know, not necessarily say, well, we shouldn't do it here because it's going to be a problem for C407, rather than how can we fix it so that it's better for C407 to be more aligned. So just thinking about it.
Yeah, I just want them to be better friends.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Elizabeth. So you will see basically a repeat of that C407 chart as we talk about the different credit multiplier options and increasing options. And keep in mind, I will say that nothing in this presentation necessarily specifically addresses decreasing the point requirements, given that the analysis that we have shows that it is achievable at its baseline level right now. But just noting that also decreasing point requirements is an option. Just wanted to break down because there have been some concerns about EPCA implications for these credit tables and the required credit points available. These next couple slides are just looking at kind of breaking down the viable pathways and the credits that are available that implicate minimum efficiency covered equipment, so equipment that is covered under the Department of Energy's Appliance Standards Program, and credits that, if you get the credits, you are required to use higher efficiency equipment. And then also separating those out from the credits that either are not equipment related or are related specifically to equipment that is not covered under the Department of Energy's program. So just recognizing that this is kind of the breakdown between the credits that are available that are equipment related and covered by DOE's program, and those that are not. Next slide. So this table is really complicated, and I think that the board will want to sit more with what this option, what this shows. But what this really is trying to break down is looking at each climate zone kind of set of columns there, looking at the climate zone required points, which is the leftmost column under each of those, then the climate zone points that are available for equipment related efficiency improvements, and then the climate zone credits that are available for equipment or non-equipment related efficiency or equipment that is not covered under DOE's efficiency program. So Anna, I know that you took a look at this and did some work in here. So I wonder if you want to share any thoughts here.
Yeah. So what we did was we took that list that Adam showed on the last slide and calculated, using for example, HVAC pathways, what combinations of pathways are available within the code language, and what would be what we believe to be the most likely way for projects to select the highest points available under each pathway, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
You will see a plus E01 in all of the non-equipment columns. That is reflective of credit E01, which requires which calculates the credits available based on the efficiency of your envelope. And we don't have any example calculations for the credits available for each building type and each climate zone.
Thanks, Anna. So like to make it really simple, I think we will ultimately, what we were saying with this table is in realistic pathways, if you use equipment efficiency versus if you use non-equipment efficiency or non-covered equipment efficiency, here are the maximum number of points that are available for those credits if you were to try to get all of the points that are available, and then comparing that to how many points are actually required for each of those occupancies in each of the climate zones. So I realize it's a complicated table. Folks can have a chance to look at that separately as well. But just wanted to, most of the purpose of showing this is to demonstrate that there are a lot of credits available in the realistic combinations, even though that doesn't necessarily reflect that that's what projects would actually do. Just recognizing that this is what is like kind of the universe of the realm of possibility. So next slide, Kim. So looking at the next table, we've talked about the renewable and load management credit carryover. So essentially, if you do more renewable and load management credits than you're required to, you can take some credit for your additional efficiency credits based on these maximums. So in the different climate zones and the different occupancies, there are different amounts that you can carry over from the renewable and load management credits. So all of this is focused on how the code is now. None of this is talking about what the board might want to do. So next slide. So Anna's going to go through just really quickly here what we think the simplest opportunities are as the code is written now for multifamily, office buildings, and retail buildings to comply under the credits.
Yeah. So what we did was we looked at all electric versions of each building type and mixed fuel versions of each building type and put together what their pathway to compliance would be. So obviously all of these credits would not go to each building because we have heat pump water heaters and natural gas water heaters listed here. But the simplest way to comply for multifamily buildings is going to be to really focus on efficient domestic hot water heating, and then to comply with the renewable load management credits, providing the HVAC load management equipment in the units is what would get them to compliance. And this was assuming that they are in a territory that does not provide a utility territory that does not provide a load management program. So we weren't assuming that they have that little credit bump for the renewable and load management credits. Same thing for office. You'll see that the list is much longer. And, we saw this delta in the chart that Adam and I were discussing before as well. If you noticed, the non-equipment version of or available points for businesses is much closer to the required target. So there's many more credits that were included in this calculation. So we're not only focusing on lighting reductions and efficient elevators, we're also focusing on a UA reduction for the envelope, and then quite a few renewable and load management reduction strategies to meet the credits required under that table. And then for retail, again, very similar to the residential credits required, really focusing on efficient water heating and HVAC load management.
Awesome. Thanks, Anna. So as you can see, the anecdote that Anna shared at the beginning, where office buildings have the hardest pathway to compliance, is very clearly demonstrated through that analysis of the most achievable pathway for offices. And so I think everyone recognizing we did not cover every single occupancy that exists, but the purpose of looking at multifamily office buildings and retail was that those are what we see most commonly built, or most that comprises a large percentage of the new construction in the state on the commercial and multifamily side. So then going to talk about things that the board has shared in ways of how to increase the credits or how to change the credits generally. So there was a proposal to essentially re-adopt the provision that was in the IECC base code prior to the ICC board's action about requiring 25% additional points for buildings without heat pumps. So essentially buildings without heat pumps would be required to have 25% more credits. Buildings with heat pumps would essentially fall under the same credits as currently in the code. And then there was also some proposals. We kind of lumped them all into this kind of broad category of work with some way appendix CF, which is the additional energy credits appendix, to move some version of that, a strengthened version of the current credit table using appendix CF into the code. And we've explored a couple of different ways to do that. And then there was the proposal to consider lessening the requirements as well. So we can discuss all of those. Next slide. So first thing we're going to start out with is looking at the 1.25 or the 25% increase for buildings without heat pumps, which is part of Appendix CF, but it's not the main part of Appendix CF. So we can skip the actual code language itself, which is on this slide and the next one. But looking at the implications for the credit tables, if you do the 1.25 multiplier, this is what the table would look like for buildings that do not use heat pumps. And the table that we saw originally is the table that would apply for buildings with heat pumps. And noting here that for the 1.25 multiplier, as the appendix is written currently, storage occupancies are exempted from the 25% increase in credits. And so you will see that the highlighted line there for S1 and S2 are not changed from the base code because they are exempted under the language. Everything else, all those credits are 25% higher than the base credits were in the code that we saw earlier. Next slide. And then Anna did the similar, redid the calculations for C407 compliance, looking at what the implications for C407 would be. So Anna, I don't know if you wanted to add any color to that.
Just to note that this, we were showing an average 2% increase in annual energy cost savings requirements across all climate zones and occupancy types.
And just reiterating the point Elizabeth made earlier about this is if C407 stays exactly the way it is, and should not necessarily, if there are concerns about these percentages, that shouldn't necessarily limit the board from wanting to do the 25% additional credits, and should more be, I think, considered in how do you modify 407 to make it more achievable. Next slide. Oh, Carolyn, go ahead.
Yeah, so we've spoken before about how the cost savings methodology is biases, like we've had this raised to us by community in our public comments, creates bias towards what's historically low gas pricing compared to electric. Do we know if these percentages, or have we done the analysis to see if these percentages basically effectively create the equivalency on an energy basis, which is what we wanted to get to for debiasing? Meaning, if you had to do 25%, 1.25 more points to get the cost saving, is that going to achieve roughly the same equivalency in terms of energy if you're comparing the one that did or didn't use heat pumps?
Yeah, that's a good question. I have to think about that. I'll look at some historic energy models that we have to determine if that really would debias against electric rates. But my gut is no, it is not enough.
Yeah, and I think the question is, does it do it at all? Probably yes, in some way, because you are having to see an energy cost savings in reduction higher for buildings without heat pumps. But I think the question, Carolyn, just correct me, is it is it enough to truly actually make it a level playing field?
Or does it go too far would be the
Or does
other
it go
part
too
of that
far?
question, right?
Yeah.
Like, does it in fact force a more efficient building because of it or not? So I think as we want to, because I certainly have an interest in how we debias the code, right? So I think we've said that in the previous conversation. And so just understanding how this methodology plays out would be really helpful.
Yeah, and we can try to get some of that information prior, because C407 is a discussion for like a month from now, so we do have some time to get more of that information. Next slide. So Anna, if you want to talk about these next ones really quickly.
Yeah. So what we found was that the compliance pathway that we selected for multifamily buildings without heat pumps under the base code without this appendix, those multifamily buildings would easily achieve these additional credits required by providing an efficient elevator. Would be the only additional need. Office compliance, we found that office buildings without heat pumps would not be able to comply with this multiplier unless they provided a DOAS with energy recovery and variable speed fan control. And retail buildings would also easily be able to achieve compliance with this by providing an occupancy sensor control requirements. Additional occupancy sensor control requirements.
Quick question from Tim in the chat, Anna. What is the cost impact to do an efficient elevator?
That's a good question, Tim. When we have presented this to clients, they have said on other projects, they have said, no, like that's not a big deal to us. I don't know the exact number, but I do know that nobody has balked at this ad, even in design now. So when we did a estimate on a very high use, high trafficked 24/7 building, we know that the payback provided to us by the elevator company was 5 years. And that changes based on the occupancy and how often the elevator is running.
Thanks, Anna. And I would note that Elizabeth put in the chat that she's heard $15,000 on average.
Yep. Awesome.
Okay, so that's the 1.25 times multiplier, keeping in mind that the multiplier in that situation only applies to buildings without heat pumps. So buildings that use heat pumps would fall under the base code as it is now for efficiency credit requirements. Tim?
Yeah, thanks. So this slide that you have up goes back to my earlier question and the difference between a shell building and a full build out, because majority of my retail buildings now are going up as shell as part of the mixed use type of construction. And so on a shell, then they're not going to be able to easily meet with occupancy sensor control because they don't even have, they've got bare minimum lights. So just as a point of clarification, the way I see that.
Thanks, Tim. Moving on to the next one, we're going to look at now the 1.4 times multiplier, which is currently in resource CRB. This one was not specifically mentioned by any board members, but just wanted to recognize that this was something for which language already exists that could be a way to address some of the comments that we saw about modify Appendix CF in some way. We saw that this multiplier exists and just wanted to share it. I think the key takeaway from this multiplier is that this applies to all buildings, electric and buildings that use heat pumps, mixed fuel, and all other buildings as well. This does not differentiate. So just looking at you can skip this one. I'm looking at the table with the 1.4 times multiplier. You will see here that the storage occupancies are implicated here. They are not exempted like they are in the 1.25 multiplier for buildings without heat pumps. So this is the credit table, what the credit table would look like with that 40% additional credits required. Next slide. And then this is the same slide that Anna shared, where you can see that those percentages for C407 energy cost savings are, again, a little bit higher. And now that this would be across the board as opposed to differentiating between all electric and buildings with heat pumps and not. Next slide. And then Anna, if you want to, we're going to talk about implications for multifamily offices and retail again.
Yeah, so for multifamily, all electric multifamily buildings with heat pumps easily achieve this with the base compliance package that we put together. Buildings with natural gas fired domestic hot water heating or heating could reach compliance with this by providing an efficient elevator, additional roof insulation, and additional service hot water pipe insulation. On offices, all buildings would need to provide a DOAS with energy recovery and fan control to comply with this. And then on retail, we would see that all electric retail buildings could provide additional service hot water pipe insulation to comply with this. And natural gas buildings would have more difficulty. They would have to provide the increased occupancy sensors, additional service hot water pipe insulation, and then credit L02, which is light dimming and tuning.
Thank you, Anna. And then we just wanted to share about Appendix CF as it's written. We can skip this slide. We can skip, I think, the next slide as well. And just really looking at the table of what the requirements are for Appendix CF, the main body meat of Appendix CF, and what implications that has for the additional efficiency credits. And as you can see here, those numbers are significantly higher. So for example, we don't have the side-to-side comparison, so my apologies on that. But when you look at just the residential occupancies here for a second, in climate zone 4B, 5B, there's 90 credits required under the base code. Appendix CF would require 200 credits. As climate zone 6B was 89, climate zone 7 was 80, and it would still require 200. So we are seeing a massive increase for most of these occupancies in Appendix CF. And so we wanted to just share this because it is there and it was part of the recommendations that some board members had, recognizing that I think given the discussions we've just had about the 1.25 multiplier and the 1.4 multiplier, in that, those are achievable, but more difficult in some cases, recognizing that Appendix CF without the next table, which we will look at in a second, would be probably next to impossible as it is right now. So looking at the next table, the next slide, just showing that the
Adam, Andrew, do you have a question on this or a comment before?
Let's show the next table first, just to get the
keep
full
going,
picture
keep going,
please.
please.
Sorry, Andrew, can we just talk about this table
You can come back to me.
Come
back to me afterwards. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. So this is the carryover table. So as we saw, the original renewable and load management credits carryover table. As you can see, these numbers are significantly higher, allowing more renewables and load management to make up the gaps in essentially achievability for Appendix CF. So just recognizing that in many cases, while Appendix CF's number of credits is very much higher, in a lot of cases, the renewable and load management carryover, the ability to do more renewables and more load management, is largely what is used to help to achieve those higher credit values. It's not necessarily more efficiency in a lot of cases. In many cases, it's going to be more renewables and more load management. So Andrew, I'm sorry I interrupted you. Please go ahead.
No. When we come back to the proposals, I don't know if I've heard a couple of comments on the credits generally. Is it even feasible to consider the credits in their entirety as an appendix to be optional? Because having worked through credits in multiple markets, hearing how much of an opportunity they are, they're extremely challenging to work through and extremely difficult. And at least for residential purposes, I don't know if anybody has any good faith sense of the cost implications, what they may be having worked through these in jurisdictions and states. And that's kind of a comment and a question. Is
Yeah,
that even
So the question, I think, is could the optional credits be an appendix? And I think yes, they could be, in whether it's possible. I think that the question to your other comment / question is understanding the complexity and the cost implications of complying with these credits, recognizing that there is we do have information that as the credits are now in the code, that there are determined to be cost-effective pathways, but what the implications are necessarily for first cost, Anna, I think, correct me if I'm wrong here, but would largely fluctuate depending on the credits chosen. So I don't know that there's like one answer of what is the cost impact, because the credits you choose would largely have an impact on that.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Go ahead, Elizabeth.
Yeah, I think to chime in with Andrew, because I agree. And I think part of the issue here is just planning them. So, if you have a developer trying to find that cost-effective path, there's, an infinite number of paths. How do they design their project to be compliant and find which are the cost-effective ways to get there when there's so many overlapping tables and complexity of credits? Like, you don't even know what kind of solar offset you have when you don't know what your loads are. I mean, it's a kind of a tangled mess, which is part of my issue with this table, that I think it just makes it impossible for developers and design teams to plan.
And so, Elizabeth, maybe you could speak to a little bit more about how, as a designer, in the design community, folks are dealing with this now. I mean, I realize that 2024 made it, changed the calculus and the number of points, and obviously increased the number of options significantly. But maybe you can speak to under 2021 how you all are addressing this and how you do that.
Sure. Yeah, because I get those calls.
Yeah.
How the heck do we deal with this code? 2021, just straight 21 IECC. If someone's using ComCheck, you have to use the web-based software. You cannot, if you're an architect, you cannot check your envelope compliance until you have selected your C406 credits. And if any of your C406 credits are HVAC or lighting, you can't even select those until your mechanical engineer has also entered in all of the equipment and confirmed that the equipment meets the efficiency. And it's a giant mess. It's a nightmare. So you have to sort of fake your C406 credits just to check your envelope compliance. And that's the 2021 IECC. Like, it's easy. It is a piece of cake compared to what we're looking at right here. I cannot imagine how teams will deal with this in ComCheck, especially if we modify it. If we modify it, so Denver modified C406 in the 2022 Denver Building Code. So that was in July of 2023 when it actually went into effect. We still do not have an updated ComCheck for the 2022 Denver Energy Code. So they're, kind of having to fake it on the envelope side of things. Like, Denver modified the envelope or the window U value, and ComCheck is still not updated. So you can't even use ComCheck properly. You can't take credit for better windows if you're doing the prescriptive path and the Denver Energy Code. So Denver got around this a little bit because, of course, Denver also modified their C406 credits. They made their own table. They made their own spreadsheet so that teams could go through and kind of plan out their credits while, still trying to demonstrate envelope compliance under sort of this not exactly accurate web-based system. The instructions that Denver said is basically just, fake your C406 credits just so you can do your envelope stuff. And when you submit it to Denver, cross out all the C406 stuff, and then use their spreadsheet. So, I see this now, increasing in complexity fivefold from what it is right now. And what it is right now is unusable. So, I mean, it literally is unusable by current folks doing 2021 IECC and anybody who's modified it. So, if we make this any worse, it will be unusable. I already think it's an issue. So when you ask, how do people plan? They call me and say, how on earth do we do this? And, they require a professional to try to help them figure it out. And, then it becomes also an issue for jurisdictions trying to say, oh, well, did they meet ComCheck? Are they passing the code? It's also enforcement challenges because, for example, for the web-based version of ComCheck, you have to have one file. I can't have my mechanical engineer doing their thing. I can't have the architect doing their thing. We have to create one login using somebody's email address that you share, and everybody gets in and tries to modify that file, and it's overlapping, and it's a giant mess. So it's a whoever designed that has never actually had to design a building, in my opinion. It's terrible. So I look at this and it's just like, they're doing a bad job with it as it is right now. I have zero confidence that they're going to make this easy for people to use and design to. So that is my rant for the day. Sorry.
So, I mean, from what I'm hearing, and please correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds like the issue is not necessarily completely with the complexity of the table so much as the software used to help demonstrate compliance with it just absolutely does not do what you need
exactly. And if you look at some of the credits, like cooling efficiency, it's now, you can't just, say, okay, if I'm, this much better, I can get a point. You have to do math. So, if I'm an architect trying to plan out how am I going to get my building to comply, and I say, oh, well, I want the mechanical engineer to, try to get me 5 points or whatever. And they, so throw that in, and then, they're planning all these things. Then the mechanical engineer comes in and says, well, that's impossible with the type system that you've asked me to design, back to the drawing board. And then insert this secondary table on that, and then people are just going to throw up their hands. And I think I saw a comment in the chat, you're exactly right. Then folks are going to go to the performance path, and then I'm going to look at that I have to get 27% energy cost savings out of multifamily. I'm just going to dump this code and go to ASHRAE. That's what's going to happen.
Yeah.
So, none of this is going to do anything because people will just go over to ASHRAE where things are, somewhat simpler. And ASHRAE also honestly aligns more with some of these credits here. So, I see all this work. If we do not make this simpler, no one's going to use this code, and they're just going to go comply via ASHRAE.
Hey, Elizabeth, just to add on to that, ASHRAE did add, and I'm sure you saw it in the 90.1 2022, which is the alternative compliance pathway for the 2024 IECC. They did add these additional energy efficiency credits, and under the energy cost budget section, now the savings are tied to the number of points. So it's the same deal. So
yeah,
but we can talk about it when we get to 407.
It's a good point, but they still allow, like, ASHRAE will still allow things that IECC doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
Like savings from infiltration reduction and, water heating load reduction. So, those are, it's still, even with some of the complexities in ASHRAE, it's still easier to comply in ASHRAE.
Yeah. So I guess what I was just trying to understand is I'm wondering if it sounds like the problem. It doesn't sound to me like the problem is necessarily fully or really mostly with the code. It sounds like the problem is with the fact that, from what you were saying, and all I can go is based on what you're saying, is ComCheck. ComCheck is the problem.
Adam, I disagree with you on that I think you're trying to characterize it too narrowly, that it's not the code. It is in large part the code.
I agree. They're linked. It's
sure.
It's both. It's not just the software. It's figuring out how to plan a building with these credits when even, you know, not having an easy way to see how many points you can get for different things. Like that's not an easy thing to calculate either. So planning around, you know, the more complex we make these credits, the more difficult it is to plan. And that's just, it's gotten so much more.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I just wanted to make sure I was understanding what you're saying. I was not trying to put any sort of color on it, more just trying to make sure I was understanding what you're saying. So thank you for clarifying that.
My statement may be somewhat self-serving, but in the interest of the state, I would strongly encourage this be an appendix as it gets further developed and flushed through until the next code cycle, that I believe you would get more widespread conformance with the deliverables that people are going to be obligated to provide, and more widespread just uniformity, which I think is in large part what the group is looking for.
So
Thanks, Andrew.
Yeah.
Adam, I want to
Go
move
ahead,
us,
Kim.
I think, on to the discussion portion of this.
Yeah.
And just noting Tim's comment in the chat as well. So I think, I mean, with the time we have left, which is about 10 minutes before I need to wrap us up, I think that this is the pertinent question that we wanted to get to around the additional efficiency credit tables. Again, we didn't even get to talk about the renewable and load management tables, but I think it would be great to open up the board discussion to understand what do folks want to do in this table. So, and I would add that there's not, Andrew, I would add your recommendation as one of the items on this list to move it to an optional appendix, because that's not currently captured. So, you know, as we kind of are looking at this, we think the sort of the options of what the board can do here are keep things the way that they are. Option 2 would be to use that 1.25 multiplier for buildings that don't use heat pumps. Another option would be to use the 1.4 multiplier that applies across the board to all buildings. You guys could consider Appendix CF, which more than doubles some of the points for different occupancies across climate zones, or do generally some other thing to increase or decrease points. I'm hearing, just kind of by way of some comments and around in chat and from board discussion, that further manipulation of the points in a way that isn't already reset in the code could just add to the layers and layers of complexity here. So option 5 and 6 on the screen may not be something that we want to consider. And then I would add Andrew's suggestion there as a final option for us to open to board discussion around, do we just want to remove the credit tables? And I think with that, if there's a suggestion to move them, I think it would also be helpful to hear how folks envision replacing them, or what goes in place of that, if anything. So, would like to open up to board discussion. Again, we have about 10 minutes. I don't know that we're going to get through the full discussion, but just any thoughts and ideas percolating with you guys, and what you'd like to advocate to your fellow board members. We do in C406. So Kevin, I'll start with you, and then we can go to Adam.
I just wonder, to Elizabeth's point about the troubles with Denver, are there other municipalities that are finding a functioning way to work with 2021? Maybe Fort Collins or Boulder. Like, how is that working? Is there something back in 2021 that we feel like we could rely on and possibly improve, rather than kind of spiraling into more complexity?
I'm going to look to Elizabeth to answer that
Sorry, I was going to say Elizabeth or Karen, if you have an answer to Kevin's question.
Everything worked great in Boulder, Kevin.
And I know Anna's got familiarity with this too, but you know, we both helped Denver through some of those challenges. And you know, anytime you change something that requires a comm check change, you know you're going to have issues there. So they developed the workaround, and they developed their own spreadsheet to help you with these calculations. And if you haven't checked it out, it's pretty good. I use it so that, you know, you can, it does the math for you. So, you know, you put in your square footage, different kinds of different building types you have, you get that blended point total. And then you can, you know, if you're the architect, you can just start picking and choosing, okay, well, all right, if I'm going to get X points here, X points there, and you can start to plan it out. It checks your compliance for you and lets you plan things. So, you know, I think if we make any changes to these tables, we have to be we have to be prepared to develop a tool that can be used by the general public and used by building departments to check compliance, and it needs to be a little easier than trying to do the online version. Like we're not going to be able to count on PNNL modifying ComCheck because I think everybody's trying to do that and it's just not happening. So you know, there are workarounds. Boulder, for example, just dumped it all together for the most part. Like if you're doing, you know, anything above a certain size that has any sort of complexity, you have to do energy modeling. They have their own mandatory checklist. So, you know, we don't even touch ComCheck for Boulder projects. And then Denver also developed their own mandatory checklists for all of their different code amendments. So Denver's got their own prescriptive path checklist, their own performance path checklist, and both of those replace the checklists in ComCheck because there was just too many things that changed to make that even be remotely valid anymore. So I think as we consider these things, we also need to be prepared to create the tools to help people, you know, address these challenges. We are not going to be able to count on the government doing it for us, or I should say, you know, the PNNL,
the federal government.
The federal government, yeah.
don't lump the state government there, Elizabeth. We
yes,
want to help.
exactly,
So.
exactly. Which can be absolutely part of the plan, and that I think can help address some of the issues that I see with the complexity of the credits. If we can find ways to simplify those, like for example, you know, think about like the math that goes around the renewable energy requirements. Okay, well, you know, are we going to ask somebody to actually do that math, or can we build that into this spreadsheet? Like, absolutely, you can build it in the spreadsheet. Somebody puts in the square footage and blah, 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 everything populates with all of the, you know, what the requirements are. So I think that can help a ton. That's difficult then when you've still got multiple tables here. Where I would love to see things go is if this secondary sorry, I'm forgetting the load management table, whatever that thing is called. If that just goes away and whatever those requirements are, they're still beneficial, but can that just be built into our standard C406 credits so that people can still pick and choose things and you can still get a benefit for doing some of these things. If there are things we want in there to be mandatory, you can still make them be mandatory rather than having this other table. But I think we could develop a tool that is reflective of what the board wants to see.
Yeah. So I guess a couple of questions on that. Well, a couple of comments. I'm putting on my representing CEO hat rather than my facilitator hat for a second here. And trying to understand, because I think when looking at the credit multipliers, that's not necessarily, I guess it's only changing the complexity in that it's only making more credits come into play for projects, right? Like now you have to do more things in order to meet the number of credits. And so
Denver has that, you know, if you're like, if you're doing C406 and you're an all electric building, you only have to get 10 credits. And if you're a gas building, you have to get 40 or something like that.
Right.
And that is then part of the spreadsheet.
Yeah. And so that's the thing that I think that, you know, I think CEO could commit to figuring out how to build out to compliance tools, whether we can talk to Denver about their spreadsheet and how they developed that. We have funding to help us develop tools and resources for local governments to use in compliance. So like, I think that is something like I would really hate for this board to come up with like let's just strip this out because it's complicated, rather than let's have CEO figure out ways that we can help you all make it easier to demonstrate compliance and maybe supplement or replace some of the things you have to do in ComCheck so that you are not being hampered by that limitation anymore. Because I think, you know, a couple of comments is one, I mean, the state requires the 2021 IECC as the minimum code right now. I think like the legislature in directing this board to come up with a code did not intend for this board to come up with a code that was less restrictive or less, it would result in a less efficient building than what is currently the state minimum. So like, I think, you know, by like the suggestion to, and I'm not saying this is you, Elizabeth, but like the suggestions to take these out as appendices or somehow eliminate it or make things other, like that are no longer required, I think that guts the requirements, right? I mean, that guts this code in a lot of ways. And I think we can't, my perspective, representing CEO and trying to understand what the legislature was intending of us is like, we can't do that.
Yeah.
And so I think,
Andrew, on that topic, that to further add on, what I would have suggested is not to just gut it is alluded and put it in an appendix, but have the 2021 stay in this context and then put the additional
I see,
in an
Okay.
appendix. That way, the progress and the intent to make progress, I think, still remains, but with an area that many professionals and many regulatory officials, I don't, just living through this in the residential aspect, not even wholly understanding the commercial aspect, this stuff could shut just slow progress, slow compliance, creates so many ripple effects and even potential legal exposure that I have found. Just I try to fight in other states, and it may be unfair, but I don't think everybody had a full awareness and appreciation of what may occur when this was prepared.
Yeah, I mean, Andrew, my perspective, I will respectfully disagree with you. From my perspective, from CEO, is that I think we would rather figure out how, because this is how the IECC is going to be moving forward, right? The way that it's moved is how the IECC is going to be moving forward. The way it was in 2021 is not. Like, they have fundamentally rethought this, and I think trying to figure out, well, let's get people more comfortable with how it used to be, and then let's pull the rug out from under them later, is not, in my view, the best approach. Rather than let's move forward with this and let's figure out how the state, how other entities involved can help make demonstrating compliance with this easier. Because I think that's, yeah. And sorry, Kim, I know we're really
no, I know this is, I can feel the energy and the excitement, and around C406, there's a lot of passion here. And I really appreciate that. With the couple minutes we have left, I do want to see, Adam and Elizabeth, I think we've kind of heard your guys' perspectives. Andrew, thank you for sharing yours. Are there any other board members that would like to share their perspective, keeping it brief, in the next couple of minutes on C406, so we can at least consider the world of options that you guys would like to consider, kind of looking at the options we've included on this slide, or what your fellow board members have brought up?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just throw in there. I mean, I agree with Adam. We definitely don't want to make a step back. I think Elizabeth's point is very important to know that we shouldn't muck with the tables and make them and create a lot of diversity there. So, and then I certainly support the idea of consolidating the load management in with the table. So,
thank you, Elizabeth. My eyes were one
way. Elizabeth and I are twins. It's fine.
Any other board members with some, they don't even have to be fully baked thoughts, any half-baked thoughts you guys want to share before we sign off today on this topic? Okay. Well, I know there is a lot to unpack here, and we've got a full meeting next time to continue to unpack it. And so our team will put our heads together on how we can help you all with that unpacking as we, between this meeting and our next one. But for now, I will skip us ahead to our next steps to wrap us up on time. So our next meeting is meeting 12, which is going to be Tuesday, August 6th from 11 to 1 p.m. Our topic will be continuing to deep dive into C406, figuring out what we want to do with the credit tables, reviewing board proposals for new credit options, and then likely there will not be time, but any implications around 502 and C503. We will, of course, as always, send the meeting minutes from this meeting for you all to review and approve at the next meeting. And then a couple big calendar focus reminders for the board. So as I emphasized at the beginning of the meeting, we really, really need you all's participation in the surveys that we send, because as has been demonstrated in the last several meetings, we are going to run out of time to talk about all of this stuff. So we have a live survey out to you all right now that asks for your input on your fellow board member proposals for section C403, 404, and 405, with the exception of the renewable energy requirements. Those proposed changes that were submitted by the board, we're not going to have time to discuss. So your survey responses are the opportunity for you all to provide feedback. If that means you need more time, if that means you need to talk to folks in your network to get answers, because we're not going to have time to discuss it as a board, please, if you have time, take the initiative to do that. We also wanted to give you all a warning that coming up in August, we will need to get the residential survey out to you all so that we can prep for our residential meetings coming up at the start of September. So you will be given the residential survey August 5th. You will have, I believe it's a full 2 weeks to complete it. And it's going to be in the exact same format as the commercial survey. So please carve out time on your calendars now to make sure that you have time to complete it, and let us know if there are any major conflicts that you all have, and we can get you that survey early. That is, I think, my big set of reminders. There may be additional things that we want to bring up to you guys based on today's discussion. We're going to have to put our heads together to figure out what those things are first. But if we want to take a collective deep breath together, we will get through it. We will figure it all out. So thank you guys for the really great discussion today. Even though it might not seem like it, I do think we made good progress. So I appreciate all of you guys' participation, brain power, and we will be in touch with all of the things. So email us with questions, and have a great rest of your guys' day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you all.